What is resilience? I think it's what makes an explorer, is the ability to go on when others would give up, the determination to make a difference, and to overcome difficulties. It's been expressed very well by various people in the past, notably by Sir Richard Burton, not the actor, the explorer, who has a wonderful piece that I quote somewhere. When he was dying, he says, "But to die under a tree was not to be thought of." And methinks that sometimes the determination to live on achieves its end. It did for him, and I've found that it's worked for me, that actually deciding to live, and in my darkest moments of the coronavirus, and having all sorts of hallucinations about dying, when I was entering spirit worlds and about taking the whole world down with me at one point, I can clearly remember deciding to live.
Fabulous.
And it's not the whole story, but certainly a determination not to give up has helped me get through all sorts of things, including surviving coronavirus. My name's Hanbury Tenison. I'm an 84-year-old explorer and conservationist, and I spent much of my life traveling in rainforests and deserts. Earlier this year, I got coronavirus very badly, very nearly died, and here I am 8 months later, alive and well, and back in a rainforest, reflecting on why I love rainforests, why I feel so at home here. And this one is close to home. It's here in Cornwall, in the tropical biome at Eden, and I just love it. I suppose my first experience of the rainforest was when I was bumming my way around the world, working on ships and being a hippie, back in 1957. And I first got into the Borneo rainforest, stayed in a longhouse, and started recognizing the universality of man, meeting these very strange, totally different people, and yet finding that I felt completely at home with them. Can you imagine looking out of a window onto pure tropical rainforest? This is as close to the real thing as you can get. I love this hut. Although it's very simple, it encapsulates huts like this that I've stayed in and slept in all over the world. South America, Southeast Asia. When you arrive out of the forest, you find a little family living in somewhere like this. They will invite you in, and this can become your home. And this is so simple, but so right. We built a wonderful longhouse for the Mulu expedition. It took 10 days and could accommodate 150 people by the end of it. And it just feels like home. My life has largely been devoted to protecting both the rainforest and the tribal people who live within it. And we were making progress, although terrible things happened in both Brazil and Borneo during the 1980s, and huge areas of forest were destroyed, and many people succumbed on the way. We were making progress. This is one of mine, and taken in Sulawesi, the Celebes, wonderful island halfway between Borneo and New Guinea. This little girl we came on in the forest, and we thought we were being ever so macho and strong and tough, all with our beach guards and our boots and our parangs and cutting through the forest. Suddenly you come on a little girl, all by herself in the forest, totally at home, like any child in a school playground. And she made us feel very, very small, because she wasn't frightened by anything in the forest. She was at home there. And she is so beautiful and so naturally there. She just made us feel very inadequate with our big, tough explorers that we thought we were.
Can you remember taking the picture?
Yeah. I love the way she looks, as though she's just saying, What's all the fuss about? These are hornbills, national bird of Sarawak, the most exciting bird to hear in the forest because their wings make a wonderful whooshing noise as they go over the forest, and you can hear them coming. Hear this whoosh, whoosh, whoosh go past in the top of the canopy. Otherwise you wouldn't know they were there. And they have these brilliant casques. This is a different sort, but the rhinoceros hornbill, the casques were much traded with the Chinese in the Middle Ages and were regarded as more valuable than gold or diamonds. This was the great trade gift. They are magnificent birds, the biggest birds in the Borneo rainforest. When they're roosting in the evening, I've often watched them going in. They're like a really squabbly old married couple. I mean, they say, I want to land on this tree, I want to stay on this tree, come on this one. And there's a terrific debate goes on. It's really noisy, just as the sun's setting. And it's going on all over the forest if you can get up high and look down on the canopy. We had a batu above Mulu where we used to go up and sit in the evening and watch everything going to bed. It's when it all comes alive. You get flocks of green parrots going past, making a hell of a racket, all shouting about where they were going to roost. And then these big hornbills just arguing the toss. As I say, like an old married couple. I mean, quite clearly saying, this tree, no that one, no this one, wah, no come here. And then they finally get together and snuggle up together. Preening going on. And they mate for life. They're lovely. Bats were one of the big things in Mulu. 3 million bats come out of the great deer cave in Mulu every night and fly off to propagate and feed all over the rainforest. It's one of the great sights in the world. They come out, but they go in a great spiral, very similar to starlings. And the bats do it in a corkscrew way and go round and round and round up into the sky. It's an evasive tactic, supposedly, to avoid because the hawks, the bat hawks, which are loitering around the edge and will pick off a solitary bat. And you can see the bat hawk loitering on the end and occasionally diving in and taking one that's left the group and picking it up and eating it. And so it's one of the great sights of the world in Mulu, in Sarawak, in Borneo. Snakes are very rare in the forest. You very seldom actually see a snake. And if you do, you're both very keen to get away from each other. But I remember an occasion when I was traveling with the Choco Indians in Panama, and I had to cross a little pole bridge across the river, which is always a bit nervous, keeping your balance on this pole, the fallen tree on the river. And I got nearly halfway across when I realized that quite a large snake was coming the opposite way, and there clearly wasn't going to be room for us to pass. And we sort of stopped and looked at each other. I mean, this is the relationship one tends to have with a snake, is peace, brother, you know. And the snake is sort of up there saying, what are we going to do? And simultaneously, we both took the decision to jump in the river, get away from the other. Unfortunately, we both decided to jump the same side off the same log and jumped in together, and were sort of tangled up and floundering about trying to get rid of each other. And my Choco Indian companions were rolling on the ground, clutching their sides and laughing, because they knew it was a perfectly harmless snake. I didn't know, but I mean, that was my most scary encounter with a snake, because I was absolutely scared, wetting myself. It's all it wanted to do was to get away, just as I did. But I loved the reaction of the locals, who just thought this was hilariously funny, seeing this stupid Englishman scared silly of a perfectly harmless snake.
Brilliant that is. What's this picture?
This is a picture of a warrior from the Mantawai people on the island of Siberut, right in the interior of this then pristine island. Much of it's been logged since. My wife and I were almost the first outsiders to reach this people, and they took us for a walk in the forest and showed us this waterfall, which was certainly the first time it was seen by anybody from outside the area. It's a sacred waterfall. There's a legend about a girl drowning in it and still being there. I have some close-ups of this chap as well, who's a very tough, fierce warrior, a hunter. And he usually has a flower behind his ear. And he's very, very pretty and good looking, and everybody thinks it's a girl. I point out that you don't want to tangle with him because he's actually a very tough guy. But here he is showing us this waterfall, which was the first time it was ever photographed. For a long time, people had no idea how the Polynesians managed to navigate the incredible distances they went through the South Pacific to find these tiny little specks of islands and gradually migrate through them to the east. And recently it's been found how that happened. It wasn't just accidental people being drifted like happens with wildlife, how the finches first got to the Galapagos, for instance. It was deliberate and very sophisticated navigation by the stars. What they would do is they would set off when the population got too big on a little island and they wanted to find somewhere else to live, for the excess population. They would go in canoes like these, only much, much bigger, 18 meters long, and very often catamarans or with an outrigger, through the huge seas that they would sail in. And they would set off in a particular direction, navigating by the stars and going on a very clear bearing until they ran out of food, which would be the point of no return, and then they'd have to turn around and do a reciprocal back to where they came from. Very sophisticated navigation. If they didn't find anything, they would wait a few weeks or years and then do it again on another slightly different bearing and come back and record all this. And eventually they'd hit an island. And then they'd come back and say, we've got an island, and several people would go and live on it and settle it. That was the way they moved through the Pacific, with incredibly fine, accurate navigation by the stars. The particular tribe that we lived with in Mulu were a people called the Barawan. They're a Kenya people, had a lovely longhouse 14 miles away from where we were. And that was where most of our workers, about 150 people, came and worked with us on the scientific expedition. And they really liked having parties. Much more interesting because they hadn't been got at by missionaries and stopped drinking. They were still drinking hard. They drank disgusting stuff called borak, which was rice wine. It tasted like vodka and Marmite. And you had to drink a whole tumbler down in one go. It was a sort of test when you were in. And being the leader of the expedition, I was of course the target for a great deal of this. And the purpose of their party really was to get me very, very drunk and incapable, because then everybody could have a really good laugh. And I haven't got a very strong head. And you would say, I don't really want to drink this, must I? You know, 2 or 3 very strong, very pretty girls would come around and hold your head and pour the stuff down your throat, going, ah, ee, ooh, and down it would all go. And they'd go on doing that until it all came up again. At that point, they knew they'd given you enough. And at the same time, as this developed, there would be a lot of singing, dancing, and the Najat dance is a very famous dance with a parang sword, in which, with immense athleticism, even quite old men would go through this dance and go right down to the ground and up again. Very balletic, very beautiful, elegant movement. And the girls would dance with fans of flowers. And it was a terrific party. It would go on all through the evening with a lot of drinking going on as well, and feasting. Then the big moment would always come, which was, now it's your turn. And we clumsy, bearded scientists of all ages would be made to perform a dance. I think the one that went down best that I remember was a Scotsman on the expedition who did the Highland Fling. Went down a bomb, terrific that was. But most of us tried to do the Najat inelegantly and awkwardly, getting down with the sword. They fell about, laughing. We had wonderful parties. And then you'd just go to sleep when the time came, and on the floor. And one of the attributes I think is useful in an explorer is being able to sleep anywhere. I'm very lucky that way. I've always been able, like an old Labrador, to be able to pass out wherever I happen to be. If I had a lot of borak, that would help. I can still do it, and I'll still have a wonderful night's sleep just lying on the bare boards. And that helps a lot to get you through it all. The statistic that they're discovering about microbial activity, incredible microbial density, which a cubic centimetre of real tropical rainforest has more life in it than there are stars in our universe. You know, more life forms on your body than there are people on the planet. And these are real things moving around. More life forms in your large intestine than there are stars in the Milky Way, which is 400 million. You've got 1 trillion living things inside you, which are making you who you are. And this is a much more exciting universe than there is out there in sterile outer space. This is the Penan, my favourite people probably anywhere in the world, and I've been closer to them than anyone. My very, very best friend is Nyapun. This isn't actually him, but he's like that. He's a nomadic hunter-gatherer who came out of the forest after we'd been at Mulu for 2 months and not seen any Penan. We were told that they were there, but that they were so shy and hidden that we would never see any. And suddenly Nyapun, dressed in a bark loincloth like this, carrying a blowpipe and with his whole worldly needs around his waist, stepped out of the forest. I was alone in base camp, and literally our eyes met across this clearing in front of my base camp that I'd built. And there was a long seminal pause during which we assessed each other. He told me 40 years later, when I saw him a couple of years ago, again, he's still alive, that he was really frightened as to what my reaction would be. And I just walked across and shook his hand and said, welcome. And we made instant friends. And that was when I asked him where he lived, and he lived over there. And I said, can I come and see your family? He thought for a time and said, okay. We both spoke rather bad Malay, but he stayed the night, and the next morning at 5 o'clock we set off running, and I ran behind him for 5 hours, quite fast, to the forest, to where his family was, 2 wives, 10 children, none of whom had ever seen a European before, and who were so welcoming and so hospitable. I felt completely at home. And I had one of the most wonderful nights of my life, staying with them while they danced, feasted, and then the next day followed me back to base camp and became my family and my best friends. I've always felt a bit guilty that that was the moment when they stopped being nomadic and started settling. But they chose to do it. We had a doctor in the base camp who helped them with various problems, and that's the way it's been. But Nyapun, the man who came out of the forest, is still my best friend. He's over 90 now, still living there. I saw him last year, and I had a message from him last week saying that he's alive and strong and looking forward to seeing me again. Well, 2 things have changed as a result of suffering this near-death experience. One, it has made me very aware of how lucky I've been and all the things I've done in my life, and wanting to share them with people, because I was so nearly gone and then I wouldn't be able to. And that has given me a kind of joy of life for being given it a second chance, a second time around, that I just want to share stories, memories, and the joy of existence, and how wonderful this world is that we live in, how diverse, how fascinating, and how important it is not to just become a slouch, because it's quite easy with lockdown and all the other things we've had to suffer. But the other side of that coin is that it gives us time to think about how lucky we are to be alive. I certainly am.